So it's called ducking hard choices. It doesn't really carry many mysteries, does it? Because, of course, last week, for all the newspaper headlines and for all the worrying about how much tax we are expected to be paying in 2029-30 to 0.1 of £1 billion and all the rest of it, for all of that, in the end, it did very little. This is still going to be a high debt, low growth, high spending, high tax economy. That's not going to change. Now, did you expect it would? Voted for a Labour government in 2024. What did you expect? Yeah, that's what they do. And what you've probably realised by now is that this government is not cuddly Tony Blair, not Tony and Gordon. This is something rather more like Harold Wilson back in the 1970s. Not even Jim Callaghan. He was more pragmatic than that. More like Wilson and Attlee. This is not a Blair Brown government. And if you hadn't quite realised that yet, then please get used to it, because it's likely to be here for another 4 years. They've got a huge parliamentary majority. There is no reason on this earth why they should need a general election this side of June 2029. So what the budget was about was pleasing two audiences. It wasn't about pleasing you or me. It was about pleasing the backbenchers, and it was about pleasing the bond markets, or doing enough to keep the bond markets off their back. Because the backdrop to this is a government that has a very high cost of borrowing and a very high amount of borrowings, an economy that's not growing very fast, and a world that's being turned upside down by new Trump tariffs. Now, that is not unique to us. And actually, in many respects, our performance is no worse than most other countries. Our debt pile is, I can find you plenty of countries who've got a bigger debt pile, but it still doesn't feel great. And there's always that feeling that things aren't what they used to be. And it's actually true, they are definitely not what they used to be. So we go to the next slide, please. The first thing is the borrowing cost. We owe a lot of money, thick end of 3 trillion. That's not unusual. What is unusual is how much we pay for it. Nobody in the G7 pays more to borrow money than we do. In fact, if you go right the way across all the world's advanced economies, there is only one, Iceland, that pays more than we do to raise money. If the British government wants to raise money to repay it in 10 years' time, so 10-year bonds, it's going to pay today about 4.4%. If it wants to raise money for 30 years, it's going to pay about 5.2%. And that hasn't really changed. It's gone up and down a bit, but it's pretty much now where it was this time last year. The budgets haven't made any great difference. Now, grant you, things could have been much, much worse. But equally, they've not really made them any better. Why do we pay more? I mean, Greece. Remember all the shenanigans in Greece? I mean, there's all the, you get all the history and culture around the Great Depression in America in the 1930s. Greece has suffered something at least as bad. Had an awful time in the past 15, 20 years. And yet today, Greece could borrow money for 3 point something. France, so could Spain, so could Italy. So these countries that we would once have sat here having a smirk and a little laugh about, these Southern European rubbish economies, they don't know how to run their finances. They're a bit flaky. They don't really do it properly. Yeah, they've got fairly big debt piles like we do, but they finance them a lot more cheaply than we do. And that's before you get to the likes of the Germans and the Japanese, or even the America, even Donald Trump, and all of the things he's done. They still pay less than we do. Why do we pay so much? Firstly, I suspect this government is not entirely trusted. Secondly, they have not forgotten Liz Truss. I cannot emphasize to you how shatteringly cataclysmic that was, because bond markets don't forget this, and don't forget this stuff, and you can't do without them. If you've got 3 trillion of debt pretty much, and you're raising 300 billion a year, you are going to need the bond markets, and you better be nice to them, and you better not upset them. But we did. We thought we'd do a nice mini budget, do a load of tax cuts, not get it costed, not do a proper forecast, and then wonder why we had the adverse consequences we did. And I think we're still suffering from that. Another reason we suffer is that we don't have backup. The Americans have the backup of being the world's reserve currency. The Norwegians have the backup of having a major sovereign wealth fund. The Swiss have the backup of being the Swiss, being reliable. Anyone else in the Eurozone has the backup of the European Central Bank. We don't have any of that. We're on our own, which is fine. But if you're going to be on your own, you better not play fast and loose. And I'm afraid we did play fast and loose, and we're still being punished for it. So I'm afraid that is quite important in the fiscal situation. If we were borrowing money for the same cost as Greece, Rachel wouldn't have needed to do anything last week. Now, it wouldn't have been ideal. She probably still ought to have done something. But, we'd be spending, say, 20 billion less a year on debt interest than we actually are. Next one, please. So that's the debt costs. We then got an economic recovery, which is, oh, crikey, it's hard work, isn't it? Blimey, hasn't this been a grind? We come out of COVID in 2022. The last final COVID restrictions get knocked off midnight on the 23rd of February. 5 hours later, Vlad rolls his troops into Ukraine and it all starts up again. So annual growth was already baked in for 2022 because of what happened in 2021, particularly Omicron at the end and the lockdowns at the start. So the economy in 2023 actually went through a minor recession, very small one. Growth was about 0.5%. Growth in 2024 was about 1%. Well, lucky we'll get 1.5% this year. It has been a real slog. Grinding recovery that never seems to really get going, that comes and goes. We always seem to have good starts to year, and then it gets flaky after that. So what the chart shows is the results of these purchasing managers index surveys, these PMI surveys. And just a survey of businesses, are things better or worse? You get a diffusion index out of those. Anything over 50 is reckoned to mean expansion. Anything under 50 is reckoned to be contraction. Ideally, I mean, if we were running along at 60, you'd probably get worried the economy was going to overheat. If you were running at 40, you'd be thinking about quite a fairly solid recession. Ideally, I'd want those numbers at about 55. 55 to 57 is where I'd like those numbers. Yeah, we sort of muddle along at about 52, and sometimes it gets worse, especially when bad things happen in America and Trump says stuff that he shouldn't and all the rest of it. So the spring was bad and September wasn't great. So really, we are growing. We're just not growing very fast. And an important distinction here is consumer-facing services. So depends what sort of line of business you're in. If you're dealing with consumers, chances are you're seeing less business than you were before the pandemic. So whether that's across retailing, hospitality, accommodation, entertainment, all those things. Some of those sectors have grown, but a lot of them haven't. I was doing a call yesterday for people in the hotels trade. And that sector is a tenth smaller than it was pre-COVID. So it's a very mixed picture. The bit of the economy that grows is the rest of services. So, professional, scientific, technical, business services. That's where the growth is. Now, that bit of the economy is about an eighth bigger than it was pre-COVID. The economy as a whole is about 6% bigger. But it has been a real slog. Next one, please. I will touch very quickly on American tariffs. I'm not going to talk about them too much. Suffice to say, American tariffs used to be among the lowest in the world. Now they're among the highest. They've got a tariff rate now of about 18%. It's not been higher since the 1930s. It's the sort of rate you'd assume was some sort of protectionist basket case third world economy, not the sort of rate you'd expect from the world's preeminent economy. It really is very different. Next one, please. Who's most vulnerable? There's the list of the vulnerable. We're not on the list of the vulnerable, are we? Because actually, we don't trade that many goods with America. I mean, yes, it's quite a chunk, but in terms of our overall economy, it's not that much. It's very important for our steel sector. As we've seen the other day, it's probably quite important for our farm. It's obviously quite important for our pharmaceutical sector that they were prepared to go and do a deal on it. It's also quite important for the motor trade. But for most of our economy, it really doesn't matter because we're predominantly a services economy. But if you're the Japanese, the Koreans, the Irish, one or two others, it is quite important. But also, you now know how to do business with Trump. It's quite simple. You know, the Swiss begged and pleaded. Trump didn't like them. They had the 39% tariff. They begged and pleaded, and still they had the 39% tariff. Somebody phoned them up and said, look, just come over and give him a present. So they rocked up, they gave him a gold bar and a Rolex watch, and guess what? It's 15%. That's how you do it. Now, that's not how you want it to be done, but that is how you do it. And actually, once you realize that, it's quite easy. I mean, if you're the Chinese, you can kick them about a bit over the rare earths. Anybody else, just take a few gold bars, all right? It's not nice. It's not what you want politics to be like. But if that's what you have to do, for goodness sake, go and do it. Don't muck about. So that's our world. For us, it's not a no growth economy. It's just a very sluggish growth economy. It's not what we'd want it to be. It's kind of almost back to where it was pre-COVID, because that was a bit soggy as well. Just we've forgotten in all the furore over COVID how soggy the years before it were. It's certainly not where we were 25 years ago, but it is pretty much where we were 8 years ago. So that's where we are. Should we do a bit of budget? Yes, right. Next one, please. The Ready Reckoning. So all this shows you is what you get if you put so much on a tax. And what is pretty clear is that if you're going to move the fiscal dial, don't mess around with the little stuff. Do the big stuff. And what we got last week was a policy measures table that I think on Excel went down to about 90 rows. I mean, good gracious, full of complete twaddle. Us little silly things that will raise about 2 and 6. The problem is, it's not they might be worthwhile doing. But the thing with a lot of the smaller taxes is they're quite technical. You can't be that sure you're going to get what you think you're going to get. You might think you're going to get money. It might trigger behavior change, and it might end up costing you. They are really unpredictable. The big ones aren't. If you slap a penny on income tax, give or take, you're going to get 9 billion quid. But somebody decided that that's not what you want to put in a manifesto. And that isn't just their fault. That actually is our fault as well. Because, when they said that to us in the manifesto, 2024, do you not think we should have been sensible enough to realise that was a bonkers thing to say? No, we'll go and vote for them because that's what they said. Oh, yeah, no, we're not going to put up taxes. Oh, no, we'll go and vote. That'll be nice. No more taxes for us. I mean, it was always completely bonkers. And yet now you're stuck by it and you can't actually do proper fiscal policy until somebody else gets into government who might not say something equally stupid. But actually they might say something equally stupid. So it's really difficult if politicians are going to make these daft promises. What I thought she was going to do was what I call the two tax shuffle. Because if you put say tuppence on income tax, 20 billion give or take, you take tuppence off national insurance class ones for employees, that costs you 10 billion. You've still got 10 billion. Ordinary people you can claim are not paying any more tax. You might have put one of them up and cut the other one, but they're not paying any more tax. Now, that's not altogether great, because if you're retired or semi-retired, like some of us are, if you're landlords, you're living off your investment income, you're still going to get clobbered. But working folk don't get clobbered. That's what I thought she was going to do. I'm quite surprised she didn't do it. I still think she might have to come to it, but not yet. But as you see, once you go down the list, it's pretty. You don't go far down before they raise quite small amounts of money. If you were going to put up fuel duty, if you were going to get a reasonable amount of fuel duty, you'd have to do at least 10 pence. No point making yourself unpopular for 2 or 3pence. Again, if you're going to do it properly. If you're going to be unpopular, make sure you're really unpopular. Don't mess about. Next one, please. So that's a kind of quick summary of what she did. You can present these numbers in various ways. That is just a figure of what they raised in, what the big announcements raised in 2029-30. We choose that one because it's the year she has to meet her fiscal mandate, which is to get the current budget in balance. Fiscal mandate says nothing about the overall deficit. Be as big as you like. Just talks about the current day-to-day spend, on the basis that if you cover your day-to-day expenses out of revenue, the bond markets, will happily lend you money to invest, on the basis that if you do it properly and spend it right, it will help your economy grow faster and help you pay them back. That's the thinking. Gordon Brown used to have a similar rule, except he had the rule that he only had to get the current budget to balance over the course of the economic cycle. One of the reasons now that we've had the OBR since 2010 is that Gordon used to cheat on that rule, because he used to change what he meant by the economic cycle. Oh, the economic cycle's not finished yet. Oh, no, it started a year later than we thought. Oh no, that one's finished. We're now on another one. That was why we got the OBR, to stop chancellors fiddling around with their own rules, i.e., setting the exam and marking it themselves. So we don't do that anymore. It was a budget that, by 2029-30, we're going to be paying an extra 26 billion in tax. That's over half of that is personal taxes, particularly those freezes on personal allowances. A lot of other stuff in there as well. The salary sacrifice stuff. If you're in business, the thing you need to watch. I'm not a tax expert, so I'm not going to talk to it. But I was on a call yesterday, and what was really exciting them was those writing down allowances. It's big. It's different. It's probably, for most people, not terribly helpful. It's certainly different. And other talks I've been to recently, not on the subject of the budget, have been along the lines of a lot more compliance efforts out of HMRC in the realms of VAT and transfer pricing. And, of course, don't forget, if you've got asset-rich businesses, you are soon going to have to do, if you're not already, you're soon going to have to deal with the changes to the way you record leases. And for the way many people present their accounts, that's quite big news. So there's a lot going on, even before the budget. So next one, please. Obvious question. What was all the fuss about? Why were we marched up the hill for this? There were some chunky tax rises, but she didn't change the main rates. And yet you'd have thought from that speech she gave Tuesday morning a couple of weeks ago, which is very, very unusual. It's really unusual for chancellors to do that. Why did she do that when she wasn't going to raise the main taxes? What was the point of it? And apparently she did know what the OBR forecast was by then, which makes it even stranger. Because having forecast a surplus on our current budget in 29-30 of almost 10 billion back in March, the general consensus was that they were going to forecast a massive deficit. They didn't. They still had her getting a surplus in 29-30 of 4 billion. So why did she feel the need to make a speech when the forecast had deteriorated only very slightly? That's what I don't understand. Now, having got that, what she did was she had to pay for those policy reversals in the summer. That's about 7 billion. She had to pay for the two child benefit cap removal. That's another 3. And then she had to give herself some more headroom. That's what we got. That's what we ended up with. She now has headroom on her current budget of 22 billion in 29-30. But I am not convinced, as you'll see in a minute. The key thing to note is that the Office for Budget Responsibility thinks that the current budget this year, on its way down to that surplus, the current budget deficit this year will be 52 billion. Okay, keep that number in your head. 52 billion. But this year, it's already 7 or 8 months through. Next one, please. Books won't be balanced. Nobody's talking about balancing the books. This is only about the current budget, not about the overall budget. That's still, the capital spending still keeps that in big deficit, and may be fine. That is fine if the current budget is well in balance. And even though the object is that in a few years' time it will be, it certainly isn't at the moment. The other rule is this daft debt rule. You have to have this odd measure of debt, public sector net financial liabilities. You have to have this falling by 29-30. It does not matter what happens to it in the meantime. And indeed, it goes up in the meantime. The only thing that matters is it comes down in that year. That's all. All you have to do is to get it to fall in 29-30. If you give a kid an Excel sheet, they can make it do that. It's not hard. So this is why the process is utterly bonkers and nonsensical, because it's aiming at trying to do things in 4 or 5 years' time against forecasts that are bound to be wrong and bound to be very wrong simply because stuff happens. You know, if you're spending, for sake of argument, 1.2 trillion a year, 1,200 billion, and say your revenue is 1,200 billion, okay, so your budget's in balance. If one of them if next time you come to do your forecast, you decide that, oh, spending's going to be just 1% higher than I thought, and revenue 1% less, well, you can do the maths. You've suddenly got newspapers crawling all over you telling you you've got a black hole of 24 billion. Well, you don't. It's 4 years off. You've no idea. And yet that's what you've got to hit. That's why you're making tax changes for things that may or may not happen. That's why you backload your budgets like this one is, because you hope it doesn't happen. The problem is, what if it does? What if it's worse? The whole thing is bonkers, and it's not in the here and now. It's about years into the future. So a couple of quick ones. Next one, debt service costs. How much is it costing us to service all this debt? About 105 billion. Does it come down? No, it doesn't. By 2030, it's reckoned to be 140 billion. That's good news, isn't it? Next one, tax burden. Yeah, 38% of GDP. It's higher than it's ever been in this country, or at least since 1945. I have to tell you, you might think this is a really tough environment. Do you want to go to continental Europe? Would you like to go and do business in Scandinavia? France? What tax burden would we be paying then? Might be more like 50. By comparison of a lot of European countries, we are not highly taxed. Certainly, we are not highly taxed if we want the sort of public services that they have. You know, if you go to France, oh, the motorway's great. Go to Scandinavia, oh, isn't it tidy? Oh, doesn't it work well? Well, why do you think it works well? Because they're taxed a heck of a lot more than we are. Our worry in this country is that if we did pay more tax, we might not get better public services because we might make a mess of it. We might not be capable of delivering them, but we might. They get better services because they pay more tax. It's not hard. And if you want less services, go to a low tax country and see what that's like. That's our choice. We can have lower taxes, but we're an aging population. Don't expect as much. Or we can, or we can hope for better services and cough up more tax. But I have to tell you, if we were going to do that, we'd have to cough up quite a lot more. I reckon we'd need to be well into the 40s before you'd notice a real difference to our public service delivery. Right, so next one, please. Out of control. This, I think, is the real problem. I mentioned you earlier that the OBR is forecasting for this year a current deficit of 52 billion. Well, they might be right, but I'm a bit dubious because after 7 months of the fiscal year, it's not 50 billion, it's 85. Now, government revenues do come in unevenly, particularly around January when you get the bulge from self-assessment. But I can't find many years in the past where the deficit at the end of the year has been 30 billion less than it was at the end of October. So I'm deeply unconvinced by that forecast. In other words, I suspect they're going to have quite a big miss on the forecast for this year. And that is then going to throw it out going forward. And that will become apparent next year. You might be back for more. Just be warned. And this is my problem. I would sooner they were trying to sort out the here and now when the budget deficit is actually looking to me like it's getting bigger and not getting smaller. The budget deficit last year was 70 odd. The year before it was 60. Doesn't look to me like it's coming down. It's supposed to be got rid of and a surplus of 22 billion by 2029-30. That's a heck of a lot. That's a heck of a lot of work to do if you're going to end up with 85 this year. So I'm not convinced. So that's the budget. There's a lot of questions to be answered. I'm not convinced by the OBR's forecasting. I'm certainly very surprised that they came up with a surplus in 29-30 of 4 billion. There are forecasters out there that thought it would be more likely they'd be forecasting a deficit of 40, not a surplus of 4. So they're very much towards the optimistic end of the spectrum. And it will be interesting to see what happens now they're going to have a new person at the helm. The guy resigned. I mean, he was a dry old stick with Richard Hughes. I mean, absolutely, committed to the job and technically very sound. Not sure, still though, not sure about some of their forecasts. Right. So, next one, please. Consumers can't be counted on. I talked about consumer-facing services earlier. Now, we want this economy to grow more. The thing is, I think there's a tendency that we just think if the government spends a bit of money, presses a few buttons, pulls a few levers, it will happen. No, it won't. Government can do many good things, but you don't know what difference they're going to make. You don't know when, you don't know how much. It may not make any at all, and it may not make a difference for 10 or 20 years. There are lots of things you'll look back in 10 or 20, 30 years and think, oh, so glad we did that. Auto-enrollment pensions, for instance. And bits of investment we put in. Think about the Elizabeth line in London. Aren't we glad we built that? And all the rigmarole of what's overbuild it. Then you open the thing, you realize, people actually do want to use it. It's really good. Why did we make this so difficult? The government can do lots of good stuff. But in the end, most of what happens in this economy is down to us, not down to the government. It's down to us as individuals, how we spend our money, how we spend our income. And it's down to us as businesses and what we do with our businesses, how we invest, whether we do or whether we don't. That's what grows the economy. It's not some mandarin sat in Whitehall. Rachel can't grow the economy. I mean, governments are probably guilty of pretending they have a bit more agency over this than they really do. Because, of course, if it does grow, they want to take the credit. You see politicians trying to take credit for getting inflation down. They don't get inflation down. That's the Bank of England. It's not them. Of course, you give a politician a chance to take some credit for something, they generally will. So our problem is really this. Once upon a time, you could always count on the British consumer to spend enough to grow this economy. We were younger. You think back 80s and 90s, the baby boomers all growing up, buying their first house, buying their second house, up the property ladder, buying their third house, doing tons of DIY and all the rest of it, spending truckloads of money. And what happens now? Baby boomers are all grown old. They're all sat in a local garden centre, eating bowls of soup and soft rolls with what is it? Soup with roll and butter, a soft one so it doesn't hurt their teeth. That's what they're doing. And they might buy a few pot plants on the way home, and that's your lot. How's that going to grow an economy? Yep, it's not. Consumer spending, in terms of the volume of stuff we buy, is 1% higher than it was before the pandemic. 1% higher. How are you going to grow an economy on that? Oh, so we blame the government. Oh, rubbish politicians. Oh, they're all in it for themselves. None of them are any good. Blah, blah, blah. Actually, the economy doesn't grow because we don't want to spend the money. If we went out and spent the money, it would grow. It would grow tomorrow. The quickest way of getting this economy to grow is to get people out shopping, spending, doing stuff, not holidaying abroad. That doesn't help. Out shopping, doing DIY, doing the things we used to do. Is it likely? We do seem to be more depressed than most other countries. Not entirely sure why we should be more depressed than most other countries, but that, I'm afraid, is where we are. Confidence is very low. So the standard measure of consumer confidence comes off a monthly survey. Used to be done by a company called GfK. That might have changed. Survey companies keep changing their names. The reading on that is last month was -19. Needs to be about -10 or better. For you to have any confidence that people are feeling like spending their money. In other words, they still don't feel like they want to spend them. And until that changes, frankly, not much will change. It's really as easy as that. Why aren't they spending? Have they not got it? Next one, please. Because rather than spending it, they have got it. They just want to keep it. Squirreling it away, putting it in a bank, putting it in ISAs, put it in, playing the stock market with it. Anything but spend it. I mean, there's tons of people who haven't got any money, but those who have won't spend it. The savings rate, the amount of our income that we hold back, is extraordinary by historical standards. If we're in an outright tearing recession, I might expect the sort of savings rate we've got now of about 8, 9, 10%. You won't see it on the chart, but for a lot of the time before 2008, that number was negative. And the old thinking about British consumers was this: if the economy is a bad patch, it won't matter. People will just spend through it. They'll just borrow a bit and get through. And that's what we used to do. We don't now. We batten down the hatches and we sit at home frightened, moaning and complaining and all the rest of it. Not spending our money. So we're going to keep the savings rate at 8, 9%. That's sort of steady state. There is the potential for some growth if that rate was to come down. Now, it's not permanent. It's a one-off hit. So it's a one-off boost. But if, say, that savings rate fell from 8%, 8, 9%, where it is today, and that fell to 4%, which is halfway between where it is now and where it was in 2017, 2018, that would give a pretty big boost to consumer spending. That would certainly help get the economy going, might give it some self-fulfilling momentum. It would certainly make people feel better. Not happened so far. And that is why consumer-facing services are the weak spot of this economy. Consumers don't spend, not because they don't have the money. A lot of this cost of living stuff is just nonsense. There certainly was a cost of living issue in 2022. It finished in 2023. Collectively, we've got the thick end of 2 trillion in the bank. Just get some of that out and spend it. It'll make a lot of difference. So next one, please. Inflation. So one of the consequences of last year's budget was that we got another dose of inflation. Not a big one, not like we'd had in 2022. We ended up with inflation of nearly 4%, a lot of costs heaped on businesses, which of course got passed on to the rest of us. The good news is that that now seems to be over. That rate of inflation is starting to fall back. This is important because it will help the Bank of England get interest rates down, and that will help businesses invest and all the rest of it. It will help people buy houses and so on and so forth. So current rate of inflation, 3.6. There was stuff in the budget deliberately aimed to get that rate down. They froze rail fares, which is the first time they've done that outside of the pandemic in about 30 years. They did some stuff with energy costs to move some of the policy costs off electricity bills into general taxation. That. All of that will help get inflation down. So I think there's a reasonable chance inflation will go lower than that chart suggests, probably maybe 2% by the end of next year. Now, the question then for the Bank of England is, will they take any notice of that, or will they just say, these are just one-off things, they'll fall out of the numbers in a year's time, and therefore we won't take any notice. Next one, please. The other thing that's happening is the labour market, which has gone from extremely tight to rather loose. You may remember 4 years ago, if people could not get anybody to work in their pub or their cafe or whatever for love nor money. There was 1.3 million vacancies in this economy. 800,000 is a normal number. We've never been remotely close to that number ever. Suddenly 1.3 million vacancies. And it's taken a long time and a long grind. But years of sluggish growth have eventually got through that lot. And we now have a labour market that's relatively loose. Vacancy numbers are lower than normal. An unemployment rate, if you can trust the stats, which is now at 5%, and a youth unemployment rate, which is starting to increase. So what that suggests is that the Bank of England, this is something clearly they're starting to worry about. So the good news is, I think you will get some rate cuts. Next one, please. I'm looking for 3 cuts by the end of next year, and I think the first one will come in December. I think they will do it this month. Might be a close run call. And they will probably say some sniffy words about Rachel's inflation measures, say, oh, this is a one-off and we'll look through it. But actually, I think they might still cut interest rates. So it was quite a close call anyway, as to whether we got 2 cuts before the end of next year or 3. I'd now go for the 3. But with that comes something else you really need to appreciate. We are not going back to base rates of 0, 1 or 2%. Or certainly we're not going back there unless something goes really, really horribly wrong. Where we're likely to go back to is a normal interest rate that begins with a 3. Might, if you're lucky, be 3. Might, if you're unlucky, be 3.75. It's going to be within that range. I think we'll bottom at 3.25. I don't think we'll go any lower than that. And that's, you're sitting, don't sit around waiting for rates to go back to where they used to, because I think it's highly unlikely. The next one, please. So where are we in terms of the way this economy grows? As I said earlier, I think we're kind of back to pre-COVID. It's pretty lackluster, I grant you, and it's pretty uneven. Generally, our growth is about 0.3, 0.4% a quarter. And if you roll that to the end of 2027 and allow for a bit of improvement, we might then be getting 0.5s or 0.6s a quarter, especially if consumers start to spend some of this money. And by the end of 2027, you might have an economy that's 10% bigger than it was pre-COVID. We are back to pre-COVID growth. The trouble is, you've probably forgotten how soggy pre-COVID growth was. Most of the 2010s was a bit up and down. There were some quite good years in there, actually. But 2018 and 2019 were not the good years. Those years as well, the economy's growth rate began with a 1. And that's where we are now. An annual growth rate that begins with a 1, we'd much sooner it began with a 2. Nicer still if it began with a 3. What would it take to make that happen? Consumers need to spend a lot more. Business need to invest a lot more. We need to get energy prices down. We need to sort out planning and skills. I mean, it's not hard to say. It's very hard to do. But I'd say of all of those, if I was going to start anywhere, I really, really want to start with energy prices. And the trouble is, I can't see any way of doing it quick. It is going to take a long time. Global markets might help. We should get into a surplus in the gas market next year. Gas prices and therefore electricity prices ought to be lower next year than they are this year. But it's not a certainty. It never is because the geopolitics gets involved. Next one, almost at the end. In case you think growth isn't what it used to be, there's the evidence. Sit and you watch documentaries and things with your kids about the late 90s, and you always have a quiet tear because you think, crikey, wasn't it so much better then? The economy actually grew. You know, we seemed to be better at doing stuff. Then it was hard, but we could kind of get stuff done. Now we seem to struggle to get anything done. We seem to have over-legislated and over-regulated and over-planned. And the baby boomers have lost their zest for life. They've got old and miserable and they don't want to spend anything. And that's what we're left with, this sort of mouldering economy that goes along at about 1.5% a year. And you hope there are ways in which it might get better. But it is such a slog. Now, consumers can be prized away from some of that money. There's plenty of growth potential in there. It's locked up. It's locked up in our banks. The money that's sat in our banks on deposit that people could take out and go and spend, but at the moment, they choose not to. So I'll finish up. Last one, show you the business climate in 2025. That's my summation of where we are. Budget that doesn't confront any of those hard choices, doesn't get to grips with spending. Neither does it have the courage to say, okay, you want better public services. I tell you what, how about you pay for them and pay a proper amount for them? And we'll have some proper tax rises, none of this messing about. You know, I could give you proper public services tomorrow, 25% VAT, 25% income tax, 10% NI, back to that for ordinary people, 12 pence on the price of fuel. Jobs are good, easy. The end of them doing it. But equally, if I was to set up a new political party, let's say I'll call it the Reset Party, and I say I'm going to put up my taxes in the short term, but in the long term I'll cut them, and in the meantime I'm going to get to the situation where every year we run a current budget surplus, not of 20, but of 100, and that way we can really work this debt burden down. We'll get debt lower. The debt will get cheaper as a result. Get the bond markets off our back. We'll get the economy moving because we'll eventually remove some of the tax burden. Now, is anyone going to vote for me to do that? There you go. You know, it wouldn't be an easy sell. It would have to be a case, one term and done. Elect me for 5 years and then kick me out, or actually I'll just walk off after 5 years. Do it in 5 years. Do it and clear off. That's what it needs. It needs somebody who doesn't care about the politics, somebody who's not thinking about the next manifesto and the next general election. And I don't know quite how we find them, because at the moment, none of our politicians have got the guts or the courage to push it either one way or other. Either to say you're going to pay European tax rates for European public services, or you're going to pay lower taxes, have less services, but hopefully get a more dynamic economy. That's a choice that nobody wants to make it. To say, as I said at the start, what we do is we duck the hard choices. Thank you very much.